Bingo! We are now live, gang! And I will start my razzle-dazzle steampunky opening logo from good old Gonna Go For It. This is Evolution Hour 37, where we're going to be discussing some really neat hijinks by our wonderful world of creationists. And everybody take note of tortucanwordpress.com. If you don't have it on your speed dial or attached to your website or your smartphone or whatever, what the hell is wrong with you? You should have it by now. Anyway, we got a couple guests today, Jackson Wheat and Cap Brony, who will hopefully interrupt me if I talk too much, which I tend to do.
Hopefully Jackson can keep us on track this time.
Hey, wait, what do I have to
Yes, you must be gatekeeper here.
Because me and RJ have already showed together we can't do it.
Yeah, I'm an overly chatty person. Now, this one came about as kind of a side issue that suddenly pumped into my thing because there had been a I originally planned to do another show on Jensen, which I'll do hopefully next week, his gobsmacking concession that, creationists accept transitional forms. We always have. What?
Yikes.
I'm going to be doing that next week. But that got bumped over because of this thing that I popped up when I learned from Raw Story about this particular group, this Creation Truth Foundation, that was in not hot water enough because they were doing creationism things about dinosaurs on Noah's Ark at a school in Illinois. And I started backlogging to look up, well, anyway, do I have anything on that group? And it turns out they had been busy before. It turns out that they had gotten into another flat back in 2013 over doing pretty much the same thing. So I spent yesterday plowing through a lot of the background source material, which I put up in the links to the show, tracking down what exactly was going on with this little bunch. And it turns out it hinges, the actual guy that organized the thing is this G. Thomas Sharp, and he's got a few sites. He's an Oklahoma pastor. The guy that turned out to be the point person here is this Matt Miles guy who has been doing dinosaur shows for quite a few times. And I put up links to two of his videos, one from 2012, which would predate the Kansas case in 2013. And then also a 2017 one that would thus predate the one that just hit the fan last month in Illinois. Now, what you got going here, I discovered when I started ferreting out all this information that they work with local people who act as enablers. This one guy, Crawford, was the superintendent of schools in the Kansas case, and he's apparently a creationist, and he was saying, well, you know, we can't let any of our teachers do this in school because that's unconstitutional. So we'll instead have this outside group come in, and they can arrange to do it off thing, but yet have a mandatory meeting where we send the kids to it automatically. And the ACLU went ballistic over it. They weren't actually able to stop it, although I've never been able to find out. I don't think it reached any adjudication or anything like that. But the thing is that you've got local enablers in that case who have the guy come in and deliver the spiel. And if you look at the 2012 video, it's about an hour long. You get to see pretty much probably what the kids were seeing in 2013. And he has just a bunch of stuff in there that's plainly parasitical. He has this George Wald quote. I put it in quotation marks, boop, boop, because it turns out, no, he never said that. And it's one of those that gets thrown around in the quote mine. It's about original life and believing in God or not. It gets troped an awful lot. And he mentioned a bunch of other stuff as well, including the Cambodian stegosaurs, that was clearly showing that he was channeling.
Yep.
The Cambodian stegosaur. He was pushing that in the 2012 thing.
Hold on, just so I know that I'm on the same page. Is that this one with the floral decorative background that we know?
Bingo.
And that's the only, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, So my Tortucan alert is flashing. Paul Meyer, PC, hello.
Hello.
I was hoping you might join because this one is right up your alley because it involves young Earth creationist stupidity and educational malfeasance all in one package.
Okay, that suits me to the T.
Yeah.
This to do a reprise. What I tumbled onto was a recent case in Illinois where this Creation Truth Foundation has been doing young earth creationist lectures in public school venues or connected to public school venues, enabled by, in the case of the 2013 case, the superintendent of schools, who apparently suffers from cranial blockage of the rectum. And in the 2018 case, because a local pastor schmoozed up with one of the school board members that got it connected up. They don't do it technically in the school context. Instead, everybody goes racing off. Somebody's got my microphone on here? I'm getting some feedback. Let me make sure I don't have, it could be me. Yep, it's me, my bad. I got to mute myself over here on the other thing. I monitor all that. Anyway, when I started doing background research on it, I found that, first of all, this group had been doing this for quite some time. And then I managed to find some videos from this Mark guy, who is their point person. And it's a Looney Tune stuff. It's traditional. All the stuff that he talks about is all very familiar. It's nice, good old-fashioned creationism. He's talking about worldview. It's a little bit of Answers in Genesis, a little bit of ICR, a little bit of cryptozoology. In the 2012 video, he was talking about the Cambodian stegosaurs. And now in the more recent stuff, he's upgraded to having a lot of props. He's got physical reproductions of allosaur claws and a bunch of human skulls and all this kind of stuff. So he's dropped some of the woo that was before and bring on new woo. And what I was thinking about here, first off, is how disconnected our side is in relating to this stuff. That what we need to have is a really vital science strike force network where activists like us all around the country, whoever finds out about this can alert people, and you can move information to them so that they know all about it, because the reporters and others would be treating this guy locally as just the creationist that comes in. They don't know that he's got a history. They may not do research on him as a history. And that would be ammunition that local activists would be able to marshal if we connected up effectively in a way that we don't have. And it took me quite a while to find some of this stuff. I looked at my bibliography and my tip work, that I found that this guy had already been in hot water earlier in 2013. And that wasn't mentioned in the 2018 coverage today. So you got a track record on this stuff. Folks out there, you want to weigh in, and what do you have to say, PZ?
So what's his name?
Oh, let's see, Matt. Let me put their. Let me get my little note up in here. Here's Matt Miles. He's a kind of ebullient but somewhat shrill guy, about maybe 35-ish or so, and he's constantly condescending to his audience, where he'll be saying to the young kids, he says, pay attention, focus, focus. Maybe because you're boring and unentertaining. I don't know. Rather than that, but. What was amusing me about the two versions of the videos is that he had probably not a bad audience for that 2012 show that was taking place in one of these mega churches. There was obviously a rock band and stuff on there. It's the kind of stuff we get nowadays. But the 2018 one, also at a church environment, was very sparsely attended. And the viewership on the video was like 20 people had seen the thing. So the church apparently was not exactly gangbusters. What I really loved is that, unlike the 2012 video where the comments were disabled on YouTube, which often happens for a lot of these woo people, the one for the 2017 one was still open and no one had commented on it. So I put a long description in there where I pointed out a lot of the mistakes he was making and cautioning them. Don't take my word for this, please. Don't take Miles's word for it either. Do your own bloody investigation, because you are not doing your faith any good props to be purveying woo and just never fact checking. And I haven't gotten any announcement yet as to whether anybody read that or commented on it.
Yeah, what are you doing helping out faith, though? I mean, go ahead, let them screw.
Well, I have no problem with it in terms of, I'm a non-believer. But I'm saying the thing is that even from within their own context, the bearing false witness thing is like frowned upon. And so any time that you can use their own apologetic frame as a way of greasing the skids, all the better from my point of view.
I think, though, that it's pretty clear that none of that stuff really matters. I mean, the fact that the evangelicals are lining up behind Donald Trump tells you that hypocrisy is irrelevant. It doesn't matter to them at all.
Oh, I agree completely on that. the reason why I engage on here, I don't have the snowball's chance in hell of persuading Miles or anybody at the church or anybody that responds to change their mind, because my Tortugan alerts are flashing, all that. But what I am trying to do is to prod the outside observer who may be following this case to follow up on their own, and to make available information to them, to call attention to things that they might want to investigate, because that can act as a little seed corn for people who are not to proceed on that. So the method to my madness here. What you want to do is to display good method, and then on this matter of trying to connect up people together in a better way. The media needs to be engaged much more directly from all of us, because in principle, local media, there are activists there are people reporting on most of these cases. The NCNSC will come along later on after the barn door has been open and call attention to stuff. But what we need is a network that can notice this stuff before the barn door is open. So I put the link up to Matt Miles's, or the Creationist website, their calendar, so people can monitor what's going to happen next from them.
Yeah. So this stuff has gone around before, and what was it, 10, 15 years ago, we had these Citizens for Science education groups that were popping up all over in many states. And the problem with them is they're active while there's some threat, but then once the threat goes, it's going to fade away. So what state is Miles in?
He's in himself. I think he's from Arkansas. The Creationist organization is in Oklahoma. The schedule that he has at the moment are all relatively local, regional. So he probably drives to where he gets to. But some of them travel all over the place. A couple cases came up just recently with me that reminded me why we need this network better. One of them was the Intelligent Design Bunch over at the Seattle Pacific University, which was free to the public. That's another example. If they're free to the public, I'm a public. So if I'm able to get in there, it's not a matter of something that you have to pay an admission to get to or something like that. And I was amazed to find, basically it was Ann Gager, Jonathan Wells, and Douglas Axe were putting on their little spiel, and they had their PowerPoints and all the rest going, and they couldn't figure out how those run. So it's nice to know that they have troubles with their PowerPoints too. But it was in front of an audience of a couple hundred people. This was the second time they had done this in this college, which is a kind of conservative Christian college over in Seattle. That didn't surprise me. But what amazed me is, as far as I could tell, I was probably the only skeptic there. Everybody else was true believers. They were homeschoolers and others. And I'm going, this is Seattle. Why aren't people who know what the Discovery Institute is up to monitoring what they do and doing ways to have pushback? If I had not been there by myself, I would have loved to have set up an enfilade, which would be me out with the books that they had out on their display, and to have another person that I would be talking to, and maybe a third person on their smartphone recording it for broadcast. And I would be explaining the things that were wrong with the books there, and finding a way to slip the contrary view in a non-confrontational way, in which I'm not attacking the poor little schnook behind the desk. I'm talking about, this is Michael Denton's book, and the problems here with Jonathan Wells's book, and all that, so that you can find ways of putting them on a new field.
Well, somebody should look into SPU's policy on that, because just as creationists often book rooms on secular universities because as state institutions were required to allow them to do that, why don't we do likewise when they book a room on the campus? We book the room next door.
And exactly that kind of a thing that we want to do. The other thing that really threw me for a loop, SciStrike had put up a link to the fact that a Answers in Genesis show was being put on at the University of Montana. And I went, whoa, okay. And so I looked into this thing, and had I had enough money to put gas in my damn car, I could have driven over there, because it's a short drive to get over there. And I could have crashed at one of the various secular groups. There's a Moscow, Idaho secular group, Montana bunch that's right there. And what intrigued me was, that you had Andrew Snelling and quite a few other creationists that were presenting this show. What I wanted to do was, you would want to bear witness to it. You would see what the attendance was, how many students were there or not. Were there any pushback from any of the local faculty? What was the reaction? Was there any media coverage? So that you would be measuring what their impact was, what material was there, plus being able to tactically push back in terms of the content in a nice, non-confrontational but witty way with little enfilades.
Yeah,
but none of that could happen because we couldn't get our act together moving fast enough to be able to do it, even though we were all within driving range and accessibility. That kind of stuff is just missed opportunities over and over again, I suspect, all over the country.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing kind of through the grapevine, I'm not sure how accurate this is, but at K-State, it's from what I heard from some people who went there, that there was apparently some creationist was supposed to go speak there, and one of the people said that they went kind of just out of just sheer curiosity, just to hear what he had to say. I think they were actually a biology student too. And he said, including himself, there was, I think he counted 12 people, and 2 were just faculty there, just, I guess, kind of observed just to make sure, everything went smoothly. So he said really 10 people.
The faculty were outnumbering the guests. Okay.
Yeah. It was like, he's like,
yeah, that's
wow. He said it was pretty
all
bad.
Of that is part of the field.
Yeah.
To get a sense of what's happening at that stuff that's, as you know, PZ, the Discovery Institute, most of their presentations are at churches, not any academic institution. And that's their main demographic. And that's why if they step out of that demographic and do it at a college, even if it's a conservative Christian college, or like the stuff they've been doing in Brazil and some of these other areas that they crow about, theoretically, the kind of thing that we're doing here can be done internationally. So you could theoretically, we could build up a network of people that any anti-evolutionist or woo believer that sticks their head up out of the bit needs to be identified and known about. The other matter relates to the politics of it. This school superintendent, who was apparently a creationist sympathizer, how the hell did he get elected? Did the people in that community know about that when they elected him, which could very well be, or did they not know about it in the same way that so many of the people in the Dover School Board were stealth candidates?
Well, I would say by analogy with my small state or my little town, that county commissioners are primarily going to be elected by interest groups. What's going to happen is all you got to do is get a couple churches behind you, get them to turn out, and you got a lock on it.
Yeah.
And
I wish that these kind of groups would come to LSU, because if they do, I don't ever hear about it. I hear nothing.
Yeah, it's I mean, with our school board, I mean, as far as I know, they're pretty, like, I live in a town of 930 some people. Yeah, and it's really small, and there's 3 churches. If you include the one 2 miles outside of town, there's 4 churches, but 3 are within the city limits. And this town isn't even a square mile big. It's a half square mile. It's just not even that. It's 0.48 square miles. So it's not a big town. And it's, so pretty much everybody knows everybody. And usually it's, people who are higher in the, more, I guess, religious food chain. That's kind of what our school board is. It seems like our people are, long-standing members of the local churches. And that's
the
really
Culture Camp bunch have been politically active for a long while, since the 1970s, and in high gear in the 1980s. They functionally took over the Republican Party. So they have been very, very busy, but generally low key. They have a lot of interconnected conferences. Chuck Misler, who's a wackaloon, young earth creationist, Velikovskian, over in Coeur d'Alene, conducts these meetings every once in a while. He used to have open access journals and that, but now everything is for subscription, so I don't get to monitor what his wackaloonery is. But he's basically a young Earth creationist.
Yeah.
And you have a whole bunch of networks with Tony Perkins and the Family Research Council and their voter value summits. That's where these people schmooze and interconnect between their culture camp political agenda and the actual politicians that they're supporting to enable that agenda. There's counterparts to it. They're going on in local districts. There was a creationist who probably still is in play. He's from one of the conservative little districts out in the hinterlands in Washington, and he had put forward an evolution disclaimer effort about 6 years ago. And I found out about it because NCSE monitored a lot of this stuff. Well, I'm a Washington state citizen, and therefore I have a perfect constitutional right to pick his brain on this point. So I contacted him and asked to see what kind of documentation I'm using, methods approach, or what sources are you relying on for your skepticism of evolution. And he mailed back to me this cockamamie piece of paper that was a bunch of creationist talking points, no sources even. And he thought that was important. Now, because we have a relatively liberal state overall, he had no chance in snowball hell to be able to get this through, and it dies in committee. And that's true of a lot of these creationists and even some of the other states where they're constantly putting up anti-evolution stuff and then they die in committee. But it still reflects underneath it a whole grassroots network that we need to pay more attention to, because they eventually get inroads in places that are troublesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know with my school, at least I can only speak to 10 years ago, but when I was there, but because I'm 10 years out of high school, and with that, it was, yes, I mean, most everybody, even most of the teachers, were well-known church members. They were well-known in the church groups, but the thing is, it still remained. I don't ever really remember religion coming up. The only time I can remember it actually coming up, which I was actually surprised on, was in world history class. And that was when we talked about the different areas that through their history were influenced through religion, such as the Middle East with Islam, US through Christianity, and things along those lines. So it wasn't even talking religion, it was talking the influence it had. And that was, I think, the closest I remember to hearing religion mentioned at school.
I bumped into a creationist in the funkiest context, and it was in high school. There were two professors there. One of them, they were both little short people who were bookends, and one was the physicist and one was the mathematician. And the mathematician was always telling us that physics is just the applied mathematics end, and the physicist was saying, no, mathematics is merely the tool of the physics work. And so we were learning calculus from two different directions on it. But the physicist one day suddenly broke from the standard thing, and he starts talking about the ice canopy theory. And it was just such a gobsmacking, out of the wall kinds of thing. And so I'm pretty sure that he was a creationist friendly physicist, amiable, wonderful teacher. He was an absolutely delightful little character, but that was showing the stuff that was going on in the 1960s, which had been about 68 or 69, somewhere around in there. And you're going to find, we know that something on the order of 15% of American high school science teachers are young Earth creationists. That's been a fairly stable number in the polling. You've got cases of where school administrators don't want to rock the boat. So in Arkansas, even though technically speaking, the Arkansas education standards are standard pro-evolution, they have billions of years, all of that. In practice, don't mention how old rocks are in the science class. That's going to offend people. So you have a series of layers of self-censorship. You have constituencies in the local community that are favoring these sorts of things. And then you have the activist types that will surreptitiously come along and arrange for the creationist speaker to come in at the church, but yet you have a mandatory thing where all the kids are sent out to it. And those sorts of things are happening probably more than we would like. And the problem is we're not cataloging or keeping track of it nearly as well as we should be. We're waiting. We hear about it after the fact. We got to get better than that so we can be proactive, because there's zillions of us all over the place. We can connect up via Skype. We can connect up via social media and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and all the other social media that we have. And there are various clubs and groups that we can do that. And we can arrange them so that anybody that's going to attack a Miles guy would know what his work is because he's put stuff up before, so you can anticipate what they're going to be saying. You can report on it. You can alert your local media about it so that there's more coverage of these things. And you can come at it from a knowledge base that will make your criticisms more effective. That's the dream I have.
Yeah, I'll say this. I don't think any of my, if they were, they weren't vocal about being young Earth creationists. Any of my science teachers were vocal about it if they were. I mean, the first time I heard it was until I started kind of hearing more about it again, and I just thought it was an oddball position. It's someone in the church that I went to when I was in high school, that was still a Christian then, said, you can't believe the Bible unless you believe in a young Earth. And I had never heard the term young. I would go, what do you mean a young Earth? And they went, oh, the Earth is 6,000 years old, as the Bible says. And I literally looked at them.
What year was
like,
this, Cap?
I think I was a junior, so 2006.
Okay, so you can see how recent all that is, and that would be in now the post AIG era, because you have PZ can jump in if I misrepresent the history on this. You got young Earth creationism was a thing that originally came from the Seventh-day Adventists. Ellen White, who had an epiphany about the flood way back at the turn of the 20th century. And she led to a bunch of different people. George McCready Price, who was an Adventist convert, he came up with flood geology in more great detail, one of the great pseudoscientists of the 20th century. And then it percolates into a verse until Henry Morris and his gang of non-Adventists buff it up and remove all the Adventist association and turn it into creation science. And then they start getting into high gear in the 1970s, and then their high water mark in the early 1980s when they're trying to get various equal time legislation in the schools. That hits the Supreme Court buzzsaw, and that short circuits. Meanwhile, the intelligent design movement is percolating in from the side, which isn't trying to be young Earth creationists. They start materializing in the late 80s and particularly in the 1990s. So by the time you're coming along in 2006, you now have two big camps of the Answers in Genesis
design
cluster versus the minor league intelligent designers.
Yeah, intelligent design was just starting to get a foothold. I remember because it was really big on the news at that time. But when I was told that it was what a young Earth was, I remember I got told I couldn't say what I said to one of the church elders, which was a church elder who said it, if I remember correctly. I looked them dead in the eyes. I went, that is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard, and whoever told you that is a liar. Yeah, apparently you can't call the Bible a liar.
There we get it. Well, in fact, to Miles's whole approach, even though he varies some of the little details of it, is essentially the argument from worldview. That there's evidence doesn't really have any intrinsic merit or value. It's your worldview. So the young Earth creationist looks at the same evidence supposedly as the old Earth person does, and yet they are blinded by their worldview. Whereas the young Earth creationist has the Word of God, which is the original booklet that tells all the facts, and therefore it must be correct. And so then they proceed around to do some ad hominems and quoting atheist scientists as their bits, and then little bits and pieces of stuff where he decides tactically what he wants to put in there. Now, your young kids are coming in there and being treated as the authority figure. They may be brought there with the parents as well. And so they're getting this top-down approach of authority from this guy who doesn't know any more about the subject than the creationists he's copying. And he doesn't even offer sources on it. He's now channeling Jeffrey Tompkins on DNA, and both of you, Jackson and PC, are aware of Jeffrey Tompkins, the geneticist creationist from the University of Georgia, who is trying to do the last-ditch effort to salvage creationist genetics.
I just have to and the way I knew it was wrong is I remember very distinctly in third grade, because I remember being Miss Krubel, who was my third grade teacher, when we were talking on science and that, and she was saying, how the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. Now I was always one to, I wanted to know everything I could whenever anyone says so. So I raised my hand and going, Miss Krubel, how do you how did they determine that? because I was like, 65 million, that'd be that's a really long time for anyone to know. And she goes, well, we have the fossils and that, and we've done radiometric dating and mentioned different kinds. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And from there, I was like, okay, now I know how they figure it, and I know it's this, and here's why. And that's why I turned around and because I had, we had actually in biology, we had to study, chemistry, like just barely touch on it. One of the datings biology that was touched on was argon, I believe it was at the time. I might have been wrong on that. And when I told the guy he was an idiot and says you can't say that, I go, argon dating proves this guy to be wrong. And I remember I just looked up and said, whatever. And it was after church when someone said that, I just like, whatever, I'm out of here. And I walked out. I'm like, I was like, that was one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. And I never took, younger creationism seriously. It never made sense to me. So.
Yeah, see, my approach then from a tactical level is to get more people onto the route of a source methods approach. And Jackson Wheat, who had to bug out because his connection was screwing up there, Pelagia and others, it's an immensely powerful tool. It's one that instead of coming at it from your philosophy down thing where you're trying to grapple over worldviews, you're coming at it from a source methods up to show that people like your Mark Miles, people like your Ray Comforts that are secondary redactors are terrible scholars. They're parasitical people. They copy crap that they never try to fact check, and they just change their ammunition. Kent Hovind is a classic example of that. He's a secondary redactor. And if our side knows their field, knows their material well enough, that you can counter them real time rather than having to go home and look. If you have to do the bit where you have to study after the fact to find out why they had their head up their ass, you're doomed. Whereas if you can engage them either live or on Twitter or any other kind of context, or have them on even in exchanges, you're using them as object lessons of what's wrong with the methodology. And it's going to be a multi-pronged thing that people do. Plus, it increases our knowledge of things. I know way more now about the biology, the genetics, the paleontology as a consequence of tracking down all of this material, that now you're reading and seeing the science firsthand. You're seeing how the scientists do their work in their own papers, and you can go over to the creation side and say that even if they got a sciencey paper with footnotes, it ain't playing by the same rules. And you can easily see that. I mean, I'm about halfway through here, so I'm going to do my plug for the people who have helped the program. And there we go. I'm still clumsy as all get out on all this stuff. There we've got our RJ's tip patrons. We got Stephen and Dyer and Eat and Yui and Mona and Henrel and Jen and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Eric and Benjamin and Staggles and Alex and Totis Real. I love saying that. And Everett and Paul. Thank you all. Here is the website that I've got. Please put it on your bookmarks in whatever context you do. There's got a bunch of stuff that I put up there. People can make use of my bibliography on its own to find technical papers on subject matters. You can do word searches in there. That's what I use it for, as well as doing the actual arguments. There is the Patreon site for anybody that wants to help on that end, although Patreon is kind of slow as molasses on the monetary end. So I recommend also the GoFundMe that can help from that end, because I'm a Social Security person here who's trying to take a personal hobby and turn it into something that is useful for just about everybody. So thank you so much for all of you who have been helping. And there's my shameless plug moment that's over on here. So we're about halfway through the show, and I will reprise the basic point that I've been putting links up of PZ. I point out in these kind of shows, I like to have direct links to people, so that if I'm talking about technical material, if I'm talking about people and I'm criticizing, I've got quite a few, not a barrage, but nevertheless some good portals that they can always get full text that they can follow up on their own. Because I don't want anybody to take my word for it, even though I have oracular certainty. It's because the method is it, and everybody will benefit by tracking down to see whether or not I know what I'm talking about, source material, and investigating on their own. It's never a bad recommendation to do.
Yeah.
Silence.
Yeah, I was just, but yeah, it's like I said, I've learned so much of just finding primary sources from RJ here. I actually accidentally made a friend mad at me by using primary sources.
it's a game that Tortukans can't play. That's one of the reasons why I recommend that we use it, because the reason why they have their head up their ass is because they have an ability to confuse primary and secondary sources. When a creationist reads something from Andrew Snelling, like Mark Huffman did, that I debated him a little ways back, he literally thinks that's a primary source material. And the idea that he needs to source check anything in there, his brain has never thought to do that. And that's part of the mechanisms that they do on that point. One thing I pointed out to PC, he was down at the Darwin on the Palouse, bumped into him there on Friday. It was a nice show there. That's something that was very unusual. For all the Darwin days that we've been there were no creationist questions.
Yeah.
I thought
that was an interesting omission.
There actually was one.
Oh, which one? Was it the guy about the justice?
It was the youngish guy with a beard who came up to tell me he was a creationist later. But his question was so vague, and he
was on the justice issue, right?
I think that was the one. Yeah.
Yeah, I recognized him. I recognized his little book. He always writes his questions down very carefully so that he can do. Yeah, I remembered him when he asked the question of Daniel Dennett when you were down here before. Same guy.
Yeah, but
he has a whole Rolodex of stuff. I bumped into him afterwards at that first time, and he has this long apologetic file card in effect in his brain. And if you interrupt his patter, he's got to go back to the trail to find where he left off on his apologetic argument. He's not a wing it guy.
Right. So anyway, to return to the original topic of confronting these guys, one thing that we can do is they're not secretive about this stuff. They're quite proud.
No.
And they announce these things ahead of time, long ahead of time. So, for example, here in Minnesota City's Creation Science Association, and they've got a complete events calendar, and you can look it up and you can see what's happening. For instance, next week they're having a talk to refute the whale evolution story somehow, which I'm tempted to go to, except it's 3 hours away from me. So that's what's so good.
Yeah. So that's why the advantage of having people locally who can pick up the thing on that, to where they can be briefed, so they'll have the knowledge and they can be the feet on the ground at no expense because they already live there.
Yeah, well, but here let me say the downside, which is that because the creationists are organized through churches, they have a natural group of people that they can bus in to pack the audience, and we don't have that. There are various things that are going on that so for instance, you must follow the Northwest Creation Society, right?
Oh yeah, they're in my neck of the woods, yeah.
Right. So for instance, they've announced that in October of 2018 they're going to have a big creation science conference in Seattle. That would be the kind of
now, is it one of those? Are those ones they charge admission for?
I don't know. And right now,
if it's free,
they haven't specified a specific date. They just say October of 2018. So the thing is, though, that's far enough ahead of time that if you contacted some other, some of the more rationalist organizations in Seattle, maybe you can get something together for a counter demonstration.
Yeah,
where you don't have to attend.
And Seattle is easy for me to get to. That's driving distance for me.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what you've got to do is contact the people who could battle against these people. And sure, their conference may cost money, but why not get, like the Seattle Atheists or the Portland group to get together and sponsor an event that's held at the same time on the same campus or wherever it is, where you've got creation or evolution speakers, just, recruit them from local universities and offer a free event to parallel the creationist event and get people to go to that. Yeah, you could also set it up so that you generate a little conflict that is newsworthy and get it into the local papers, and that can also help promote the whole thing. That you do a little judo here, and you use their promotion against them to
to act
promote
as
your
our
own ideas.
promotion in terms of getting the science across. Now, there's a whole bunch of things
Yeah.
I've been trying to pioneer at my end, effectively street theater approaches. There's the map of time idea, to be able to convey the history of the universe in a way that doesn't require props. It doesn't require PowerPoints. You can do things just using the physical space you're in. I first did that with Steve Meyer when he was at the Creation Week. Then that's where I first bumped into him when Philip Johnson came into town in Whitworth in 1998. And I was using the rows of seats in the theater when he and I were talking later, and there was a bunch of students that gathered around us. And I was using that in effect as a map of time tool, where each row would represent a time slice, and over there would be that section of the Cambrian, and then over here is the stuff afterwards. And so I was using that to show how much information was missing from the field and what the trajectory was. And so any of those props that you can use, if you're indoors or outdoors, you don't want to be limited, so that you can always show the science data and talk about things in ways that will be engaging, and you can use whatever tools you have available.
So, for instance, in Ashland, Oregon, they've actually institutionalized that, and they have an evolution walk. They got the city to approve putting artwork down along there's a park with a sidewalk that runs along, and they've used the sidewalk and they've painted it.
Oh, to use as a time measure.
Right. So there are events painted there.
Oh, that's very powerful.
And then another thing they do is, because the park is right there, they can plant things there and put various things there. So, for instance, you go back, 300 million years ago, and they've got a little collection of horsetails planted there, so you can sort of see what the organisms were like then. And then grasses, of course, don't come until much later, so you can sort of lay that out. So all you got to do is get the local town council to approve of this kind of artwork, and you can probably find volunteers who will paint it for you. And
it's getting all the different means and media together on it, because there's lots of science lovers out there. What we've not been doing well enough is the connectivity, and because of the thing that everything I'm doing here is functionally free. It's at zero cost. So there's lots and lots of people around the country and the world who can do the same kinds of a thing if we just connect up.
Yeah, I would actually love to try and do that up in K-State, because I know the city park in Manhattan has this really long sidewalk, and I'm going to be going there, and I'm sure if I could convince the city to do it and get enough people in the art programs up at K-State, that we might be able to convince the city let's do it. That would be awesome if we could do that.
Yeah,
and get the biology department to look it over and make sure that all the art is accurate for what we need.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the first step is you got to line up the people who are going to do this, and do a little prototype just on paper that you can show and demonstrate.
Yeah, some of the proportions are real easy, because you've got the origin of life at 4 billion years ago thereabouts. And so you got about 2.5 billion, you've got cyanobacteria showing up. So that's a relatively easy proportion to remember. About 1 billion years, you're starting to see the roots of multicellularity. You got your Cambrian explosion at 500 million. Then it starts getting busy, and you can proportional. A third of all of that post-Cambrian stuff are just dinosaurs, the Mesozoic. So you've got a bunch of easy benchmarks that can be applied to whatever scale you want.
Yeah. You just have to have... this takes artistic talent. You need people who can actually put together something that looks good. So you've got to find that. It also helps if you get local school teachers involved, so they can tell the city council, hey, this would be a really useful tool for us, to take our kids and walk down to the park and show them this stuff.
Yeah, and actually the high school is, the freshmen, because Manhattan has East and West Campus, and I think it's East Campus is the freshman, and West Campus is like sophomore through senior. And the East Campus, where the freshmen are literally right across the street from the city park. So it would be perfect for biology 101 in freshman year.
Yeah.
Another thing too, bring in the geologists, because this is going to piss off young Earth creationists. because if you're having a venue, it's like if we would be doing something here in Spokane, we're on the Columbia Basalt. We were under Lake Columbia during the Missoula floodings. There's a whole geology that you know about. Every place has got geology experts that they know about. There's been the chronic guides to the various states so that you can know what the geology was. It's why the real estate that's under your feet where that display is taking place looks the way it does. And every bit of that is also information that's thumbing the nose at the younger creationists just by bringing it in.
Yeah, that would be interesting because Manhattan is really heavy. Like just coming in from where I live, you go through what's like it looks like it's been cut out. I think it's just erosion and landslides and hills because it's on like a hill. So when it's
the Palisades.
That was the case.
That's testifying to volcanic things. That in New Jersey, that's where the a section of the camp, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, started out. That split up Pangea. It brought about the Triassic mass extinction. So virtually every area, Kansas. I think the state
a lot of
fossil of Kansas is a Basilosaurus.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of limestone area stuff with us around here. So I mean, there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of geology and that. So I mean, I don't know if K-State has a geology. They probably do. I don't know.
Yes, there'd be no doubt about it. And so the idea that we have some really wonderful, there's a guy, I can never remember his damn name, but he's a wonderful one. I think he's from Central Washington University, and he does these absolutely riveting videos on the geology of the Pacific Northwest. And it's from the volcanism, from the formation of the Columbia Gorge, and then the Missoula floodings and others. And he's very personable. He's just really, they're typically about like 10 minutes long. And every one of them that I've seen are just absolutely gobsmackingly good. And there's going to be geologists around in all these different venues. They may have local meeting clubs together. We have a bunch of geologists that meet here. That's how I found out about Lake Columbia. That's just in the cutting edge of the science. And that's another advantage of connecting up, like with PZ and all the other scientists in field. I follow a bunch of scientists on Twitter. They're acting as tripwires because they're looking at the current incoming technical literature that you can then get ahead of, instead of trying to find out about it after the fact because you've researched something that was brought up by some creationist and doing it that way. So the more that we can build up a network where we're presenting the information, we're presenting cutting edge information, we're ahead of the data curve, and the poor creationists, we know where they are and we can flatten down their information at the same time. That gets them in a vice between their errors and the actual science that hopefully we can use to our advantage and make headway against open-minded people. We'll never can persuade the Tortugans.
It's I remember up in
comment PZ.
Actually, I remember this is the KU with Kansas. Their chant actually came from their geology department, the rock chalk, because of what Lawrence is based on with all the shale and the limestone and everything else that's there. That it's like, I mean, I think it's in Grove County, I think it is, but we have.
Well, there used to be a giant estuary. I think the Niobrara Seaway is one of the names it is called, that stretched all the way from the Gulf of Mexico up and basically split North America in half. And so there's beachfront property all during the Mesozoic and gradually turning into land as the things are uplifting and all of that, and it begins to shrink and cut off, and that has paleoclimate implications. Anybody in Kansas, the western part of Kansas, has just this astonishingly massive, the biggest wind farm I've ever seen in my life up there, catching the winds off of the mountains up on that escarpment, which that escarpment reminded me of some of the places in the coulees in here in Washington, where also they take advantage of this drop off as the wind comes along off of a mountain range and then drops down into a valley, and that accelerates it, a Bernoulli effect and all of that. That's why they put the windmills. That now connects you up to environmental policy. It connects you up to economics. It connects you up to a whole bunch of stuff that brings in the geology and the paleontology and all other in a big interconnected thing that you can fine tune for your particular audience.
Yeah, and it's and here's one that it's just blows my mind because if I remember correctly how it forms, but the Monument Rocks, if you're familiar with them out of Grove County, it's it's a natural landmark, natural landmark. It is the Monument Rocks, and it's basically these giant chalk formations. And I've seen them before once, and they're really, really cool.
Yeah, some of that stuff too is very context sensitive. Diatoms and stuff that compose a lot of chalk were just coming in during the Mesozoic. And so that's the reason why the White Cliffs of Dover and a lot of these other places are formed. And some other earlier deposits stopped being made because of the formation of little critters that sucked up the phosphorus and other material in the seas. And so suddenly those processes don't work anymore. So there's the paleobiology to a lot of this material, that wherever you're doing your presentation for the map of time element, you can tailor it to relate to what's under their own feet, what's involved in their economy. The reason why they may have the industries that they have has to do of things that happened millions of years ago.
From what I'm seeing, it looks like that they are dated at the late Cretaceous for those chalk.
Yeah, that'd be about right. Diatoms and others were coming in. There was a big sea change going on with things. And then, of course, as you start hitting later in the Cretaceous, you start getting stressed from the Deccan Traps eruptions that are spewing carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxides and stuff into the atmosphere. And it's feeding back to where it's starting to destabilize the ecology in the oceans. And then later on, it's starting to affect even stuff on the land. And then, of course, the asteroid comes along as one more thing that on top of everything else.
Yeah. It's. I mean, I've seen pictures
we've
of
gone
it.
off
It's
subject.
really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
We basically covered the basic elements of what it means. We've moved in effect beyond the original point about Miles. That my point was that we should be building up a science strike force network to interconnect all of us, everybody that watches these videos, everybody that connects up in our social media, to find ways to be able to prepare for things well in advance, to be able to work ahead. So instead of being reactive, we're proactive, to where we're already organized long before that creationist organization is having their show in next October. And we've already got things to where we're not trying to come up with something at the very last minute on it, because they self-identify. PC is absolutely right about that. That they don't hide their things they're doing. They just depend on us not to be noticing and reacting, and that's got to change.
Yeah, and it's like I said, I mean, there's just, like I said, the limestone formations out here in Manhattan, because that's like the main rock we have out here, and I mean, it's bad. I mean, you can just dig and just literally go down about 2 feet, and you're hitting limestone. I mean, you're not just little rock. I mean, I'm talking big, 20, 25 pound rocks I've dug out before, digging holes for people. And I mean, you dig out limestone, and it's, I mean, that's what forms around here. And it's crazy. And I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, Kansas has a lot of, I'll give it this. It's got a lot of interesting rock formations. I mean, I'll give it that.
Everywhere
very interesting
has some amazing rock formations. One of the things that I call it in this project is the wanderlust problem that creationists have. They're always looking somewhere else for evidence of the flood rather than at their own feet. So they're talking about the Lewis Overthrust or Polystrate fossils or the Grand Canyon rather than trying to explain it from their direction. But if they did look onto their own feet, they would discover, no, there's no flood layer where they live, and there's really no flood layer in the Grand Canyon either.
It's really, I mean, the way that they describe just doesn't make sense. And I remember almost kind of joking about this, but it's more what they believe, and that's what's scary, is that so the rock layer was laid down one layer, hardened while still underwater, so another layer can be laid down, hardened,
and then a separate flood comes along later from a lake upstream that then carves the actual canyon, all with the rock still being soft or not. How fast, Andrew Snelling and the other creationists, Steve Austin, all that, they don't get anywhere close to even thinking. This is one of their big blind spots. How does it get to be rock?
Well, look no further than Mount St. Helen and the canyon that's there.
Mhm.
Oh wait, you
Oh
already
yeah,
covered
they
that
love.
in
I
the Is
love that they
Genesis
would use
history?
that, where they talk about, oh, the little mini Grand Canyon in the Mount St. Helens. Well, yeah, the water flows would carve a little thing that looks superficially like a canyon, in the same way that you can make a mini Grand Canyon with your garden hose in the area in your backyard if you work at it. But it
Yeah,
don't stay there, and it erodes
yeah,
away
it's
very quickly because it's not solid rock. And
yeah, it's
because I lived in this area, I shoveled Mount St. Helens ash off my driveway at the time. This is more than peripheral interest to me.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting just how they make the claims they do. It's yeah, just
Well, Snelling is a fascinating example because I know Steve McRae and others are absolutely convinced Snelling is a conscious liar, that he knows that he's telling bullshit. And I keep on saying, no, I'm flashing my Tortugan alerts. When you
yeah,
look at one of the videos he did just recently, he was being interviewed by another creationist, and Snelling was talking about this particular rock deposit of gravel down in New Zealand, his own area where he came from. So this was a visceral thing for him, and he was insisting this could only be formed in the flood. Well, he mentioned where it was, and so but no sources, and I tracked down that information and found out it's from a tidal estuary. That spot was
yeah,
formed. That those kind of rock deposits are naturally formed and observably formed in tidal estuaries. Now, when you looked at the few things that he had posted on this subject, they were all like 20 years old, and they were drawing on sources literally from the 19th century. But here he
jeez,
was in his own field. He couldn't look up the newer material in his own discipline. That's because I think he's got his little Tortugan mind shell
yeah,
closed, and all he can do is to look at the stuff that he thought about back in the
yeah.
70s and 80s, and he stays stuck with that, and his imagination
And
is all shriveled up.
that's the thing that I never understood with him, and I believe it was Snelling who did it. Wasn't he the one who tested something from the Grand Canyon, sent it to a lab that said you're not going to get the right date if we test this and it's under this age, and then got mad when he didn't get the right date?
Mm-mm.
I'm like,
Yeah, well, he's done a bunch of that, and he got recently in a flat because he wanted to collect more samples. And to some extent, they're doing it by picking up stuff that's from separate areas. Steve Austin did that with one of his things.
it might have been
If
Steve
you're familiar
Austin
with
who did
isochron
that
dating,
one.
he tried
I
to
think it was Steve
undermine that
Austin.
by basically breaking the rules.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to watch the lengths they go to, especially when they technically should have the technology. They should have the understanding because they're professional geologists. They've gone through the training, and yet they're doing things that are straining to get stuff to fit the dogma, and they're behaving very, very badly as scientists.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know it's not the same thing, but it's like it just makes me think of literally just the line from Gone with the Wind about where I don't care if I have to lie, steal, cheat, or kill as God is my witness. It's like they almost take that little bit of that line too
Well,
hard.
their minds work kind of like that. What they have is an object of desire. They are committed to the science that must be true to fit what they want to be true. And their
Yeah,
minds will do whatever it takes to do it. A fine example here is Todd Wood, who is one of those honest creationists. He's actually a quite meticulous scholar. And so he admits that no, evolution is not a theory in crisis. There's actually lots of evidence for evolution and all of this stuff, but he refuses to allow his brain to believe it because he's
yeah,
committed to young earth creationism. And yet when he goes into areas, he will often criticize fellow creationists for making mistakes of things. So he can be very meticulous within a compartment. He's the one, for example, that using his little techniques for baraminology, decided that one of the Australopithecines belonged in the human baramin. And I'm going, oh, really? That's oh my. What an amazing little phenomenon that one was. And of course, it's
So
because the whole methodology they're using is a weird way of
wait,
approaching the data field. I've
wait.
discussed baraminology before.
So Australopithecine is now a human.
Yeah, yeah,
I thought
literally
I thought they
in
always
the
said that
human
was
Homo
always me.
baramin. Yeah, you're going, whoa,
Oh
that's an
wow,
amazing discussion there. But
that's
Wood as well, he's part of that group that they've conceded the horse sequence. They found all sorts of stuff that effectively are just confirming evolutionary models.
yeah.
And he couldn't
It's
put the rest of them in there. He couldn't. I don't even know that he's got Homo habilis in the human
yeah.
holobaramin, but one of the Australopithecines made it in. Wow,
Now the
that's
question
astonishing.
is, did Homo erectus make it in? I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And,
I am
isn't it because they just really don't want to say Homo and erectus in the same word? I mean,
Yeah,
it just is
might
very
be.
troublesome for them.
Might be. I'm sorry. I'm very immature of my humor.
I know. Well, there's no heckamati. Well, we're just about at the end of the show here, and PZ did not come back, so there we go on that. Let me put my a little screen share on here to end with my doodad logo here, and there's our Troubles in Paradise logo that Gonna Go For It came up with, Peter. And I'd like to thank Cap and PZ, who had to leave, for coming in for this discussion, where hopefully this is the start of a connection. Think about the points I'm raising about the idea of a science strike force network, where everybody of like mind figures out how to connect up, plan ahead, contact local media, monitor creationist groups, find the ammunition you need if you're going to engage with them. Don't spend yourself silly on money, but don't use, theoretically, a lot of this doesn't involve any expenses at all. It just involves the sweat equity that we will do anyway because we're interested in the subject, and it's a bloody important thing. So I would like to thank everybody for showing up today and having the discussion that we have. And this concludes Evolution Hour 37.